Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're tackling the devastating Los Angeles fires,
Yeah.
and we're going to be looking specifically at this firsthand account from an NTV Washington correspondent who's reporting live from the disaster zone.
Live from the disaster zone. Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense read, let me tell you. He really captures just how powerful nature can be, and I think it serves as a really stark reminder
Yeah.
of the challenges that we face in a world that's increasingly dealing with the effects of climate change.
Absolutely. And it's just unbelievable how quickly this situation escalated. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about the largest fire in modern history here.
Yeah.
Potentially the most devastating disaster that LA has ever seen.
I mean, this is not just a few acres burning.
Right.
This thing is massive. And the correspondent, he talks about thousands of homes that would potentially be reduced to ashes.
Jeez.
And it's just heartbreaking to think about the death toll, both human and animal, all the forest creatures and the plant life that are being wiped out.
Yeah. It's hard to even fathom the scale of this destruction. And the thing is, this is still happening.
Right.
This isn't over yet. The correspondent's account really highlights the uncertainty. I mean,
Right.
how much worse can this get? How long will it take to even contain this blaze?
It's terrifying. And, amidst all the chaos and the uncertainty, there's already this storm of criticism brewing. People are pointing fingers at city officials, accusing them of incompetence.
Yeah.
They're saying that there weren't enough fire trucks, that there wasn't enough water,
Right.
and that there's a severe shortage of aerial firefighting resources.
Well, I mean, it's important to remember that responding to a disaster of this scale
Right.
is incredibly complex, but at the same time,
Yeah.
the correspondent, he seems to agree that these criticisms, while maybe fueled by some raw emotion,
Yeah.
they might actually have some merit.
And he points to these three key factors that are fueling this inferno. The first one is the wind. It's relentless, and it's pushing the fire toward residential areas with such force that homes are just being wiped out in minutes.
Yeah, the wind is always a major factor in wildfires.
Of course.
But when you combine that with a densely populated area like LA, it creates these unpredictable firestorms.
Right.
I mean, they can shift direction in an instant.
Yeah.
And it makes it incredibly difficult for the firefighters to contain the blaze.
And then on top of that, you add in the fact that so many homes in Los Angeles are made of wood.
Oh, yeah.
The correspondent actually describes a 34-story building
Wow.
that was reduced to ashes in just 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. That's how quickly these wooden structures go up in flames.
It's just a stark reminder of how vulnerable traditional wood frame construction is in wildfire-prone areas.
Yeah.
I mean, these homes, they have historical and aesthetic value.
For sure.
But it really makes you question if enough has been done to mitigate the risks.
Absolutely. And the third factor is almost unbelievable, especially considering how wealthy Los Angeles is.
It sounds like they just don't have the resources needed to fight a fire of this magnitude.
Really?
The correspondent, he mentions a lack of fire departments and readily available water, and even the ocean you'd think would be a source of water.
Oh, yeah, living on the coast. I mean, the ocean seems like an obvious solution.
Right.
But apparently the rough sea conditions are making it impossible for the plains to collect seawater.
Wow.
It really highlights the need for having more diverse firefighting strategies.
In the correspondent, he paints this really vivid picture of this iconic city being ravaged by fire.
Yeah.
You know, Hollywood, Malibu, Santa Monica, these landmarks are being reduced to ash.
It's hard to imagine.
And it's just this reminder that even in the face of, nature's fury, the human element is really at the heart of this tragedy.
That's an important point, I think.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the physical destruction, all the buildings.
Right.
But it's vital to remember the human cost.
Yeah.
We're potentially looking at 150,000 people displaced from their homes.
And it's important to remember that disasters don't impact everyone equally.
Right.
The correspondent highlights how less affluent regions, like the Palid region, which is home to many Mexican workers, are bearing a disproportionate brunt of this tragedy.
It's just this stark reminder that those who are often the most vulnerable in our society often suffer the most when disaster strikes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it raises all these questions about preparedness, and the equitable distribution of resources, especially when it comes to protecting our most vulnerable communities.
I think the most unsettling part of the correspondent's account is this sense of helplessness as authorities are basically just waiting for the fire to burn itself out.
Wow.
They're hoping for a decrease in wind intensity or for some rainfall, but it's the middle of a dry season in California. There's no rain in sight.
And this helplessness, it kind of resonates with a pattern we've seen in previous disasters. It makes you wonder if Los Angeles, with this history of floods and hurricanes and earthquakes, is truly prepared to meet the challenges of a changing climate. I mean, this isn't just about reacting to the current crisis.
Right.
It's about proactively preparing for future threats.
It's a pretty somber thought, realizing the immense power of nature and the limits of human intervention. This fire really raises important questions about preparedness and resilience and the vulnerability of our communities in the face of increasingly frequent natural disasters.
It really does. And these criticisms that are being leveled against the city government, they really highlight how important it is to have a transparent and accountable system in place.
For sure.
To ensure the safety and well-being of all citizens, especially during times of crisis.
It's definitely a lot to unpack.
And this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
Stay tuned as we delve deeper into some of these systemic issues behind resource allocation.
Yeah.
And we'll explore how cities like Los Angeles can better prepare for the challenges of a world that's increasingly impacted by climate change.
The correspondent's account is just filled with accusations directed at both the governor and the mayor. Yeah. A lot of people blaming them for incompetence in the face of this disaster. It seems like a lot of the criticism stems from this lack of preparedness.
Right.
People pointing to the shortage of fire trucks,
Yeah.
the insufficient water supply, the inadequate aerial support as evidence that the city was just caught completely off guard.
Well, what's fascinating here is that it goes beyond just pointing fingers.
Right.
These criticisms, they raise questions about resource allocation and preparedness on a deeper level.
Yeah.
California has positioned itself as a leader on environmental issues.
For sure.
But has that actually translated into practical action when it comes to combating wildfires?
Yeah.
Have they invested enough in prevention and mitigation efforts?
Right.
These are the questions people are starting to ask.
And then there's the whole issue of using seawater to fight the fires.
Right.
You'd think that with Los Angeles being right on the coast,
Yeah.
accessing seawater would be like a simple solution. But the correspondent explains that the rough ocean conditions are making it too dangerous for planes to safely collect water.
That's wild. I mean, this really highlights the importance of having diverse and adaptable firefighting strategies.
Yeah.
Relying solely on aerial water drops can be effective.
Of course.
But it's clearly not a solution for every situation. We need to be prepared for those unexpected challenges.
Yeah.
It's like having a toolbox with only one tool in it.
Right.
What happens when you need a different tool for the job?
That's a great analogy. It makes you realize that we need a more comprehensive approach to tackling these kinds of disasters.
Yeah.
And speaking of having the right tools, the correspondent also brings up the issue of wooden structures.
Oh, right.
And how these homes are essentially tinderboxes just waiting to ignite.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about how quickly they go up in flames.
Yeah.
Which seems to be a major factor in how quickly this fire spread.
It's a critical point. I mean, the prevalence of wood frame construction in Los Angeles and in many parts of California, really, makes these communities incredibly susceptible to wildfires.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance between preserving the historical and aesthetic character of these homes and ensuring the safety of the people who live in them.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if building codes need to be updated to reflect the increasing risk of wildfires.
Yeah.
Should there be stricter regulations on the types of materials used in construction, especially in areas that are highly prone to fire?
That's a complex question with no easy answers.
Of course.
On the one hand, you have people who want to preserve the historical character of their homes and their neighborhoods.
Right.
On the other hand, you have the very real threat of these devastating fires.
Absolutely.
It's a difficult conversation, but it's one that needs to happen.
Yeah.
We have to find a way to balance preserving our heritage with protecting lives.
And while we're talking about the human cost of this tragedy, the correspondent does a really powerful job of reminding us that behind the numbers and the statistics are real people whose lives have been completely upended.
Right.
He talks about the potential of 150,000 people being displaced.
Wow.
Homes being reduced to ash, iconic landmarks disappearing forever.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the big picture and forget that these disasters have a very real and personal impact
Yeah,
on individuals and families and entire communities.
for sure.
I mean, we're not just talking about property damage here.
Right.
We're talking about people losing their homes, their livelihoods,
Yeah.
and in some cases, their loved ones.
And as we mentioned earlier, this fire isn't impacting everyone equally.
Right.
The correspondent highlights the plight of the Palid region, home to many Mexican workers who are being hit particularly hard by this disaster.
This speaks to a larger issue of environmental justice
Yeah.
that we often see play out in these situations. You know, lower income communities, they often bear a disproportionate burden when it comes to the impacts of climate change. They might live in areas that are more susceptible to flooding or wildfires or extreme heat,
Yeah.
and they often have fewer resources to cope with these disasters.
It's a tragic cycle where the people who are least responsible for climate change are often the ones who suffer the most from its consequences.
And it's not just about the immediate impact.
Right.
The long-term effects of these disasters, things like lost livelihoods, displacement, health problems,
Right.
can have ripple effects for years, even decades to come.
Yeah.
The trauma, the grief, the anxiety, these are all factors that can have a profound and lasting impact on mental health.
It's like a collective trauma that settles over a community,
Yeah.
even long after the flames have died down.
Right.
It makes you wonder what kind of support systems are in place to help people cope with the emotional and psychological fallout of these disasters.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Mental health resources are often overlooked in the aftermath of disasters like this.
Yeah.
We tend to focus on the immediate needs, like shelter and food. But the psychological impact can be just as devastating, and it needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. The correspondent doesn't shy away from highlighting the psychological toll of this fire either. He describes this pervasive sense of helplessness among the people he's spoken to.
Right.
This feeling that they're completely at the mercy of nature's fury.
That feeling of helplessness is understandable given the scale and intensity of this fire.
Right.
But it also points to a larger question that the correspondent raises.
Yeah.
Is Los Angeles a city that has a long history of dealing with disasters like floods and hurricanes and earthquakes? Is it truly prepared for the challenges of a changing climate?
Yeah.
Are they doing enough to mitigate these risks and build resilience into their infrastructure and communities?
It's almost like the city is living under this constant shadow of disaster.
Yeah.
Knowing that these events are becoming more frequent and more intense because of climate change.
Right.
You have to wonder if they're doing enough to break this cycle of destruction and recovery.
It's not just about Los Angeles either. I mean, cities all over the world
Right.
are facing similar challenges as climate change intensifies. Rising sea levels, more frequent and intense heat waves,
Right.
more severe droughts.
Right.
All of these factors are increasing the likelihood of future disasters. It's a global issue that demands global solutions.
Yeah, it sounds like we're at a crossroads.
Yeah.
We can either continue down this path of inaction and face the increasingly devastating consequences of climate change,
Right.
or we can choose a different path, a path of resilience and adaptation and collective responsibility.
It's a choice that will determine not just the future of cities like Los Angeles, but the future of our planet.
For sure.
And it's a choice we need to make now. We need to invest in sustainable infrastructure.
Yeah.
We need to develop early warning systems and strengthen community resilience. We need to be thinking long-term and acting collectively.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the criticisms being leveled at the city government, the lack of preparedness, the devastating human toll of this fire, and the connection to previous disasters.
Yeah.
But there's one more piece of this puzzle that I think we need to examine, the question of who benefits from this disaster. I know it might seem cynical to even ask who benefits from a tragedy like this, but it's a question that often comes up in the aftermath of these kinds of disasters.
Right.
Is anyone actually profiting from this devastation?
It's a valid question, and in the case of this LA fire, it leads to some pretty uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
The correspondent kind of subtly hints at this.
Okay.
When he contrasts the experiences of, wealthy residents in Malibu and Hollywood with those in the less affluent Palid region where a lot of Mexican workers live.
He points out that while everyone is obviously suffering losses,
Yeah.
those with the financial resources will likely be able to rebuild.
Right.
But those in Palid who were already more vulnerable, they're going to face a much more difficult path to recovery.
It really underscores how these disasters they often exacerbate existing inequalities.
Yeah.
Economic disparities, which are already a major issue in our society.
Of course.
They become even more pronounced in the wake of events like this.
It's a concern that echoes throughout history. Sadly, we've seen time and time again how disaster recovery can actually end up reinforcing existing power structures
Right.
instead of challenging them.
It's those with money and influence who often bounce back more quickly,
Yeah.
while those without those advantages struggle to regain their footing.
And this fire, while a unique and horrific event, it kind of fits into this larger pattern of disasters that Los Angeles has faced.
Okay.
You know, floods, hurricanes, quakes.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the city is perpetually bracing for the next catastrophic event.
It makes you wonder if that history of disasters has actually led to a culture of complacency. Have they become so accustomed to just reacting to these events that they've neglected the crucial work of proactively preparing for the future?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's easy to fall into that cycle of just reacting to crises without addressing those underlying vulnerabilities that make these events so devastating.
And Los Angeles, like many cities, is situated in a geographically vulnerable location.
Yeah, for sure.
Building a city on a fault line right next to the ocean in an area that's prone to wildfires.
Yeah.
It's kind of a recipe for disaster, especially as climate change intensifies these risks.
Absolutely.
So what can be done to break this cycle? Is Los Angeles just doomed to repeat this pattern of destruction and recovery?
Well, not necessarily, but it requires a fundamental shift in thinking.
Okay.
You know, we need to move beyond this reactive approach to disaster management and embrace a proactive one.
Well,
this means investing in resilient infrastructure.
Okay.
Things like seawalls and fire breaks.
Right.
It means strengthening building codes to ensure that structures are more resistant to natural disasters.
Yeah.
And it means developing early warning systems and effective evacuation plans. But maybe most importantly, it means addressing the root causes of climate change.
That's a tall order, but it sounds like the alternative is just accepting a future of increasingly frequent and destructive disasters.
I think we're at a critical juncture, not just for Los Angeles, but for the entire planet.
Right.
We can choose to continue down this path of complacency
Right.
and just face the consequences.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to act, to adapt, and to build a more resilient future. It's a choice that will determine the world we leave for future generations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Los Angeles fires, I think we're left with a lot of questions and concerns.
For sure.
But I also sense this glimmer of hope. The fact that we're having this conversation, that people are demanding answers and calling for change, that's a positive sign. We're starting to recognize the interconnectedness of these issues, from climate change to social inequality. And that awareness is really the first step towards meaningful action.
I agree. I think the more we understand these complex challenges, the better equipped we'll be to find solutions.
Yeah.
This fire, as tragic as it is, it can be a catalyst for change. It can be a wake-up call that inspires us to create a safer, more just, and more sustainable future.
So to our listener, we leave you with this. What role will you play in building a more resilient future? How will you use your voice and your actions to make a difference?
A good question.
I think the answers to those questions lie within each of us. The time to act is now.
Absolutely.
The future depends on it.